Honorable members, the Honorable Mr. President,
Merci, chers collègues, bonjour.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Let's take 1 minute for silent prayer and meditation.
Veuillons nous asseoir.
Please take your seats. The meeting is called to order. Dear colleagues, in accordance with the Article 38(1)(h) of the Rules of Procedure, I have the great pleasure to invite the following guests to come in the chamber. Dr. Lewis Hovey, Director, Representative of Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization in South Africa. His Excellency Honorable Michael Galler, Chair of the European Parliament Delegation for Relations with the Pan-African Parliament. His Excellency the Ambassador Mul Katenge of the Republic of Uganda. To the Republic of Ethiopia and Permanent Representative at the African Union, Chairperson of the Peace and Security Council. Mr. Jerome Pigne, Coordinator of the Strategic Network on Sahel Security. Jerome Pigne, Coordinator of the Strategic Network on Sahel Security. Your Excellency,
Excellence, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
His Excellency the Ambassador of the Republic of Uganda to the Republic of Ethiopia, Chairperson of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, Your Excellency Mr. Michel Galler, Chair of the European Parliament Delegation for Relations with the Pan-African Parliament, Dr. Lewis Hovey, Representative of Director General of Food and Agriculture Organization in South Africa, and Mr. Jerome Pigne. On behalf of the Pan-African Parliament, I'd like to welcome you all very warmly to this chamber called Dr. Ndini Musa, where we will have the pleasure to hear from you throughout this morning. I'd like, first of all, to invite Dr. Lewis Hovey, Director of FAO in South Africa, representative of Director General of the FAO, to deliver his message of solidarity. Dr. Lewis, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll bring greetings from the Director General of FAO, Mr. Jose Graciano da Silva. Our message of support is FAO on agriculture and its potential to contribute to sustainable and inclusive growth, as well as to peace, security, and prosperity through our solidarity. Excellencies, Commissioners of the African Union, Excellencies, Ambassadors of the diplomatic missions, Honorable parliamentarians of the Pan-African Parliament, distinguished personalities, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be here today. At the outset, on behalf of the Director General of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, that is the FAO, Mr. Jose Graciano da Silva, I wish to register FAO's appreciation in having the opportunity to engage parliamentarians across the continent to contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and more importantly in Africa, to advance food security, nutrition, and sustainable agriculture. Today, I would like to highlight agriculture and its potential to contribute to sustainable and inclusive growth, as well as peace, security, and prosperity in Africa through solidarity. The Memorandum of Understanding between FAO and the Pan-Africa Alliance was signed last October under the auspices of the African Union and the NEPAD Project Coordination Agency. And it provides a framework for continuing collaboration on activities of common interest in order to jointly advance legislative and budgetary frameworks for an enabling environment for sustainable food security and nutrition in Africa. It also provides an umbrella for mutual accountability on the commitments outlined in the 2014 African Union Malabo Declaration, which is fully aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Rome Declarations of the Second International Conference on Nutrition, commonly called ICN2, with its framework for action being implemented under the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition. During the 13th regional meeting of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly, which took place last February in Freetown, Sierra Leone, one of the FAO's flagship analytical work, the Regional Overview of Food Security and Nutrition 2016, or commonly called the SOFI 2016, was officially launched. It gives a regional outlook. For example, 153 million individuals in sub-Saharan Africa, which is about 26% of the population above 15 years of age, suffered from severe food insecurity in 2014 and 2015. And in 3 children under the age of 5 are presently stunted, although sub-Saharan Africa reduced the prevalence of stunting by 7.2% from 1985 to 2016. It is also highlighted that agriculture growth through investing in resilience has a very strong potential to contribute to building and maintain peace and security, and in addressing migration issues, whether at internal, regional, or global levels. Agriculture's potential for sustainable growth and inclusive growth. Distinguished delegates, Africa's agriculture potential is very well known. to all here today. In sum, Africa accounts for 45% of the world's surface area suitable for agricultural production. Even with some large arid and semi-arid areas, Africa's vast water resources are, on average, underutilized. Only about 2 to 3% of the renewable water resources in Africa is in use. This compares to 5% worldwide. Africa is home also to an abundant supply of labor for agriculture-related products and services. Furthermore, with almost 226 million people aged 15 to 24, Africa has the youngest population in the world, representing 19% of the world total and expected to increase to 42% in 2030. But more importantly, the value of Africa's food and agriculture market is projected to reach $1 trillion by 2030. Thus, unlocking the enormous potential of Africa's agriculture to significantly contribute to sustainable and inclusive growth, as well as to peace, security, and prosperity, is key to achieving the Africa we want, as espoused in the Africa's Agenda for 2063. Excellencies, there's already sufficient evidence and knowledge on agriculture's potential for sustained inclusive growth. But for us in Africa, unlocking this potential remains a challenge. It will require addressing some of the many challenges inhibiting Africa's agricultural transformation. In light of this, FAO continues to provide support and work with the African Union, its Commission, its member states, its NEPAD Project Coordination Agency, and the Pan-African Parliament, as well as other partners in various key priority areas based on its comparative advantage. These areas include: 1, the control of transboundary plant and animal pests and diseases; 2, climate change and the environment; 3, youth employment, urbanization and migration; 4, gender and women's empowerment; and lastly, 5, renewed interest in private sector investment in agriculture, among others. Given the limited time I'm allocated today, I'll focus the rest of my presentation here to just 3 key priority areas for African countries, and which guide FAO's work towards unlocking Africa's agricultural potential. Firstly, is nutrition and food security. As mentioned in the beginning, the Memorandum of Understanding between FAO and the Pan-African Parliament provides a framework for continuing collaboration on activities of common interest when such collaboration is deemed. That is, to position the issue of food security and nutrition at the highest level of political and legislative agendas in order to achieve the developmental objectives of Africa, and to contribute to a Pan-African Alliance on food security and nutrition as a regional platform for African members of parliament to discuss and agree on critical issues related to food security and nutrition. The technical cooperation project to operationalize the initial collaboration is being finalized at FAO. Apart from this technical support, which aims at strengthening the capacity of the Alliance on Food Security and Nutrition and Right to Food, the Alliance can serve as an umbrella for further collaboration between FAO and PAP. Parliamentarians could take a lead and work closely with civil society organizations at the constituency level to advance food security, nutrition, agriculture initiatives in fisheries, aquaculture, mixed cropping farming systems, including livestock and non-wood forest resources for food in some contexts, and to promote socially and economically sustainable and environmentally friendly climate-smart agriculture. The second area of focus is youth employment, gender, and women's empowerment. Sound rural development policies and programs for young people are needed. to strengthen their capacities and facilitate access to productive resources needed to drive broad-based growth in the agriculture sector and rural economy. Also needed are strategies for an enabling environment to promote youth employment and entrepreneurship in agriculture and agribusiness along strategic value chains. With almost 200 million people aged between 15 and 24, Africa is the youngest population in the world. Due to the lack of attractive employment opportunities, services, and facilities in rural areas, youth are increasingly migrating to urban areas and abroad, adding to the emerging international migration crisis, or often ending up in urban peripheries characterized by the proliferation of slums. The youth population is expected to continue to grow. 10 to 12 million new jobs will have to be created in Africa per year until 2035 to absorb the new labor market entrance. Consequently, youth employment is high on policy agendas in Africa. The AU Summit in January 2015 adopted the Declaration on Employment, Poverty, Eradication, and Inclusive Development, which reaffirmed the commitment to reduce unemployment, in particular of youth and women, by at least 2% annually over the next decade. The continent has also engaged in a wide range of ongoing initiatives toward youth employment, and most African countries have committed to specific youth employment objectives in their agricultural and employment policies and their national agricultural investment plans. Against this backdrop, FAO is launching a new special program entitled Youth Employment, Enabling Decent Agriculture and Agribusiness Jobs. The program will support the African continent in harnessing its huge demographic dividend, while contributing to the rejuvenation of the aging farming population. Beyond farm jobs, the program will also explore the potential for job creation in rural, non-on-farm economic activities in food value chains, agribusiness development, and their related support services. Africa continues to record progress on gender equality and women's empowerment. Many countries are producing remarkable achievements, especially on gender parity in primary school education and number of seats held by women in parliament. Promoting women in paid employment outside agriculture, cultural practices such as inequitable inheritance practices, early marriage, and household power dynamics, coupled with unequal economic opportunities, continue to pose challenges. To accelerate the enhancement of gender equity and women's empowerment, policy changes should be directed at tackling discrimination against girls and women in educational systems, encouraging greater participation of women in productive and remunerative economic activities, and increasing the voice of women in making decisions at all levels of society. FAO's work in this area is aimed at promoting gender equality as both a fundamental human right and an essential means of achieving its development goals of sustainable rural development and food security and nutrition. The third area is on solidarity by Africans for Africans. The Africa Solidarity Trust Fund, commonly called the STF, is an innovative Africa-led fund to support Africa for African development initiatives. Its main goal is to strengthen food security across the continent by assisting countries and their regional organizations to eradicate hunger and malnutrition, eliminate rural poverty, and manage natural resources in a sustainable manner. The fund was officially launched during the 38th session of the FAO conference in June 2013, with funding totaling over United States dollars 40 million, and has been made possible thanks to African partnerships with Equatorial Guinea, Angola, and Cameroon, as well as a group of civil society organizations in the Republic of Congo. ASTF-funded projects have resulted in multiple positive impacts, in particular generating youth employment, improving natural resource management, diversifying livelihoods, eradicating hunger, and supporting sustainable food production. The ASTF funds and partnership approach has supported over 36 countries to tackle hunger and poverty, and in so doing is making an important contribution to the Malabo Declaration and Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The fund has also supported Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, the countries hardest hit by the Ebola epidemic, to help curb the potentially devastating impact of the disease on food security and on the livelihoods of farmers and others in the rural areas. FAO is working with African countries, facilitating the sharing of African best practices and expertise in food security and agriculture through its South-South and triangular cooperation tested framework. African countries are encouraged to scale up African-wide cooperation and South-South and triangular cooperation. African solidarity stretches beyond financing and includes valuable in-kind contributions. Every country has a lot to share. Distinguished delegates, let me conclude by noting that FAO's work in unlocking Africa's agricultural potential to deliver sustainable and inclusive growth at the national and regional levels are firmly grounded in the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, the CADAP, through the Malabo Implementation Strategy and Roadmap, and the commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. I would like now to give the floor to His Excellency Honorable Michael Galler, Chair of the European Parliament Delegation for Relations with the Pan-African Parliament. I'd like to greet you and to welcome you as well as your delegation. Dear colleague, the floor is yours.
Honorable Roger Nkodo-Dong,
Honorable Roger Nkodo-Dong, President of the Pan-African Parliament.
dear colleagues, thank you very much for giving us the honor to address the Pan-African Parliament today with regard to our cooperation in the light of existing and upcoming challenges for both Europe and Africa. I have been attending the PAP sessions for more than 10 years, and it has always been a pleasure and a privilege. The main reason why we have set up a separate delegation in the European Parliament for relations with the Pan-African Parliament is the joint follow-up of the joint Africa-EU strategy, and in particular the 5 priority areas of the 2014 to 2017 roadmap established after the 4th EU-Africa Summit in April 2014. But while assessing the past, we must primarily focus on the future. In November 2017, the Africa-EU Summit in Abidjan will take decisions on the next 3-year roadmap, leading us to 2020. This gives us an opportunity to voice our priorities from a parliamentary point of view, where we agree that they should figure prominently in the next roadmap. In our analysis of the past and vision for the future, we should broaden the scope and try to build on the respective strengths and common aspirations. The world has changed since the first agreement on the joint Africa-EU strategy in Lisbon in 2007. At that time, the AU was still young. The EU was in search of a new partnership with Africa, as we saw the challenge of Africa possibly turning away from its northern neighbor Europe to the BRICS states, for example. The joint Africa-EU strategy, however, was meant as a partnership of equals, reaching out from continent to continent, and an optimistic atmosphere prevailed. 10 years later, the EU faces a series of different challenges, with the Brexit, the rise of populism, Russia's warfare in the east of Ukraine, the migration crisis, terrorism, and last but not least, the high level of unemployment, especially in the south of the continent. At the same time, Africa has become more self-confident and wants to do away with any dependency syndrome. The AU has its own Agenda 2063 with the first 10 years implementation plan. It also has 9 new partnerships beyond the EU. However, at this very moment, the trend seems to change again. The BRICS countries are mostly suffering from crisis themselves instead of serving as models. The optimism about African Renaissance has been replaced by a more sobering analysis. The demographic wealth becoming a challenge rather. Slowing economic growth, continued dependency on oil and other commodities exports, violent internal conflicts and terrorism. A new African realism and belief in its own strength, coupled with well-coordinated, targeted and flexible contributions from the EU and other partners, should result in the attainment of the commonly agreed Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030. This Agenda 2030 is also translated in the African Union's first 10 years implementation plan of the Agenda 2063. Since we agree on the objectives, I believe that in the analysis of the priorities, the EU can, to a very large extent, work together along the African Union lines, while at the same time implementing its own global strategy. In practice, the EU last week has issued a joint communication to the European Parliament and the Council for a new impetus of the Africa-EU partnership, in which it proposes a stronger mutual engagement and increased cooperation, both bilaterally and in the international arena, based on common values and interests: security on land and on sea, the fight against transnational threats, and sustainable and inclusive economic development in Africa in order to create the jobs that the continent needs. I also believe that this blueprint, which still needs to be discussed in our Parliament, should be a starting point and a basis for the discussions on the future of EU development cooperation, currently governed under the Cotonou Partnership Agreement, which expires in February 2020. As you see, the decisions to be taken in 2017 and 2018 will be crucial for a new impetus in Africa-EU relations. And I believe that our two assemblies are in the best position to steer the final results of negotiations in the right direction. We will be judged by future generations on our action. At the same time, it is important that the Pan-African Parliament further develops towards a fully fledged legislative assembly, to which the implementation without unnecessary delay of the Malabo Protocol is a very important step. As you know, you will always find the European Parliament as a strong supporter of this objective. I am now continuing in French for those who want to take the headphones.
Finally, for the case of urgency, please allow me to talk about the dramatic events taking place in DRC. The massacres are perpetrated in Kassav since September and have led to the displacement of 1.7 million people in the neighboring forests. There has been testimonies of utmost cruelty, and the local authorities are guilty by omission. Together, we should request for these people to be brought to justice after an in-depth and independent inquiry, because impunity is not acceptable. The responsibility of protecting the population is the first duty of each population. Faced with the refusal to accept this role, it is incumbent on UN to provide security to the population, because they also have the mandate to inquire on the assassination of 2 of their employees. Urgent aid should be distributed to the population without much ado. Dear colleagues, I would call upon you to exert your influence vis-à-vis the leaders of the African Union to avoid for this situation to continue.
Antesana, muito obrigado, muchas gracias, shukran.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, dear colleague, for your message. I would now like to call upon the speaker to communicate to us about the first item on the agenda. Apologies, the clerk of the House.
first item on our agenda this morning is presentation and debate on peace and security in Africa.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais avoir...
Thank you. Before giving the floor to Honorable Ambassador, I would like to remind all members here present of the important role that Honorable Ambassador Moore is playing for the advancement of the ideals of the Pan-African Parliament. At the CRP, he has always supported the Pan-African Parliament, so it is with an honor and renewed pleasure that we receive His Excellency, the Ambassador, in his quality as Chairperson of the Peace and Security Council, to share with us the report on the peace and security during this period. Honorable Ambassador, you have the floor, sir.
For the purpose of this presentation, I refer to Mr. President as Right Honorable Right Honorable Speaker. Right Honorable Speaker of the Pan-African Parliament, honorable members of the Pan-African Parliament, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I feel embarrassed that the document that has been circulated to you is not the document I'm going to present. So I would request that that document be withdrawn and be replaced by the one that I've handed over to protocol. Right Honorable Speaker, it is a great pleasure that I'm here to address the Assembly on issues of peace and security. And thank you very much for your kind words about me. We received 3 invitations from the Pan-African Parliament. The first invitation was for members of the Peace and Security Council to attend this session as special guests. The second invitation was for the annual joint consultative meeting between the PSC and PAP to take place after this session. The third invitation was for the chairperson of the Peace and Security Council to make a presentation to this session on the status of peace and security in Africa. On behalf of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, I would like to express sincere appreciation to the Pan-African Parliament for the 3 invitations. Unfortunately, prior to receiving the invitations, the PSC had already agreed to undertake other equally important activities during the same proposed period. As such, and as was communicated, it has not been possible for the PSC to fulfill the other 2 invitations. Instead, we agreed that in Uganda's capacity as chairperson of the PSC for the month of May, I should come and fulfill the 3rd invitation, namely to make a presentation on the status of peace and security in Africa. I'm therefore humbled to address the Assembly today. We should undertake further consultations and agree on an alternative date for the PSC-PAP joint consultative meeting. Right Honorable Speaker, honorable members of PAP, I don't know how much time I've been allocated because I didn't receive a briefing, and I don't know whether I will be able to fulfill your rules of procedure here, but I will take a risk and try to be as brief as I can. The Peace and Security Council attaches a lot of importance to regular interactions with the Pan-African Parliament, consistent with the provisions of Article 18 of the PSC Protocol, which requires the two organs to maintain close working relations in furtherance of peace, security, and stability in Africa. Indeed, the PS Protocol also requires the PSC to have close working relations with other AU organs in our common efforts towards achieving a prosperous, peaceful, and united Africa. It was in this spirit that at its 666th meeting held on 13th March 2017, among other things, the PSC decided to institutionalize and regularize an annual joint collective consultative meeting with its sister AU organs whose respective mandates cover issues of peace and security. Through this collaborative approach, the Peace and Security Council and PAP in particular will be more effective in discharging their respective mandates within the framework of the African peace and security architecture, which is our blueprint for promoting peace, security, and stability in our continent. Indeed, it is also through such a collaborative approaches that we will collectively be better placed to realize the noble goal of silencing the guns in Africa by the year 2020, and by extension, to also achieve the goals outlined in our Agenda 2063. Honorable members of PAP may wish to recall that in November 2016, in Lusaka, Zambia, the PSC held a retreat on practical steps to silence the guns in Africa by the year 2020, and developed a master roadmap to that effect. The master roadmap, after consultations with AU member states and other sister AU organs, including this Parliament, was endorsed by the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government during the summit of January 2017, held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The PSC believes that with the complementary and supportive role of all other strategic role players, such as PAP, the PSC will have a wider and broader perspective to peace and security in Africa. Besides, successful implementation of the AU Master Roadmap on silencing the guns will require collective and complementary action by all actors and stakeholders. Right Honorable Speaker and honorable members of PAP, since the last briefing by the PSC on the state of peace and security in Africa, which was done in October 2016 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, the PSC has continued to deploy sustained efforts to consolidate the progress made in promoting lasting peace, security, and stability on the continent. While some progress has been made in addressing conflict and crisis situations in Africa, there are still challenges that remain to be addressed. To begin with, the threat of terrorism, violent extremism, and radicalization continues to grow in certain parts of our continent. Attacks continue to take place in countries of the Lake Chad Basin, in the Horn of Africa, especially in Somalia, in the Sahel region, especially affecting Mali, Burkina Faso, Libya, and others. Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab terrorist groups continue to expand their heinous activities in our continent. As these groups capitalize on the existence of ungoverned spaces in some of the member states. Libya is a classic example of what happens in situations of state failure or collapse. As such, the prevailing situation on the ground requires us to redouble our efforts and perseverance. This is why, at its 680th meeting, held on 18th April 2017, after being briefed on the operations of the multinational Joint Task Force against Boko Haram terrorist group, the PSC reaffirmed the need for a comprehensive approach in the fight against Boko Haram, an approach that takes into consideration the importance of addressing the root causes of Boko Haram insurgency, and in the longer term of supplementing military action with socio-economic development projects in communities liberated from Boko Haram. Doing so will significantly deprive the terrorist group of support and recruitment grounds. In the same context, we underlined the need for adequate resources to facilitate the socio-economic rehabilitation of Boko Haram combatants who are defecting from the terrorist group. These measures will also apply to other terrorist situations concerning Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, and others. In addition, intelligence cells to provide accurate information are being strengthened under the Nouakchott process dealing with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Boko Haram, and the Djibouti process dealing with Al-Shabaab. Right Honorable Speaker and honorable members of PAP, besides terrorism, let me now scan through the specific conflict situations seized by the PSC. In South Sudan, the overall political and security situation remains extremely volatile. And as a result, the country is experiencing humanitarian challenges of extreme magnitude. Implementation of the peace agreement signed in August 2015 is at a very slow pace. As the Parliament may be aware, the conflict has spread to other areas of the country, especially Equatorial region, which was previously peaceful. There is renewed fighting in many parts of the country. The recent ceasefire signed in Yei State should inspire the rest of the country to do the same. The PSC has encouraged the South Sudanese parties to cease all kinds of hostilities and seriously engage on implementation of the Addis Ababa Agreement. The PSC has also encouraged the countries of the region to continue to intensify engagement with the parties to the current conflict in order to secure a return to sustainable peace. As you may be aware, efforts are underway to deploy a regional protection force with a mandate to protect civilians and state institutions, as well as support implementation of the agreement. The United Nations Security Council fully supports the deployment of the RPF. I should hasten to add here that there are some issues we still have with the UN regarding the appropriate mandate of this force. I also wish to inform the House that on the diplomatic front, the AU, through the former President Alpha Omar Konaré, has been playing a significant role in ensuring the implementation of the peace agreement in South Sudan. Furthermore, in October 2016, the PSC undertook a field mission to South Sudan, where we gathered first-hand information regarding the prevailing political, security, economic, and humanitarian situation on the ground. The visit by the PSC was also meant to express solidarity with the people and government of South Sudan. The PSC stressed to all the interlocutors the importance of the South Sudanese themselves to invest in peace building in their country, as no one else can do that for them. The PSC underscored the importance of fully implementing the peace agreement in an inclusive manner to ensure its sustainability. In all these endeavors, a lot of resources are required. The PSC has appealed to the region and the international community to substantially provide humanitarian assistance to the many South Sudanese refugees in neighboring countries and the many IDPs in the country, as well as financial support to the transitional government of national unity to effectively implement the agreement. It is instructive to note that there are many provisions in the agreement that require a lot of resources to be implemented, including the cantonment and processing of forces. On Somalia, the PSC recently undertook a field mission to that country from 23rd to 26th March 2017. From the findings of the PSC field mission and subsequent reports, I wish to stress that Somalia has witnessed some very significant political progress within the last 4 months, following the successful organization of elections with the support of AMISOM. There is now a new federal government with a new president, prime minister, as well as a new cabinet and federal parliament. Constitutional review process is underway, and so is the process of formation of new regional administrations. The federal government has also reached an agreement on a national security architecture. There are also renewed efforts towards inclusive political coherence and cooperation between the federal government and federal states. With regard to the security situation in Somalia, evidence gathered by the PSC is that the capacity of Al-Shabaab to wage direct military confrontation against AMISOM has been significantly degraded and weakened. It also indicates that Al-Shabaab has been pushed out of a number of major towns and cities, and it now relies on sporadic surprise attacks against prominent personalities and AMISOM convoys. Furthermore, AMISOM continues to liberate many areas from the terrorist groups. However, Al-Shabaab is still far from being defeated. It still retains the capacity to stage deadly attacks using suicide bombs and powerful improvised explosive devices. The new government of Somalia has given itself 2 years to defeat Al-Shabaab, but this will be on condition that the Somali National Army has the required capacity to do so. It is in this context that during the PSC field mission, the federal government appealed through the PSC through the PSC for the UN Security Council to lift the arms embargo on Somalia, so that the government of Somalia can acquire the necessary weapons to fight Al-Shabaab, and beyond that, to eventually exercise full responsibility on maintaining peace and security, as well as law and order throughout the country, particularly in areas liberated from Al-Shabaab. And more so, as AMISOM begins its exit, which is initially planned to begin in 2018, a joint UN-AU and more so, as AMISOM begins its exit, which is initially planned to begin in 2018. A joint UN-AU technical mission will undertake an assessment exercise later this month to determine a new concept of operation for AMISOM, including an exit strategy for the AU forces. For now, the current war in Somalia, which is asymmetric in nature, is largely intelligence-based. It requires effective adaptation on the part of AMISOM and the Somali National Army and the other Somali security forces. But of particular concern to the PSC is ensuring that AMISOM has all the necessary resources to effectively discharge its mandate. The honorable members would recall that the EU reduced its funding for AMISOM troop allowances by 20%, a decision that naturally has negative impact on troop morale. And indeed, it can only boost the resolve of Al-Shabaab to continue to undermine AMISOM gains and momentum. Given these challenges, the PSC has continued to call on the UN Security Council to enhance financial support to AMISOM through the utilization of UN-assessed contributions, bearing in mind that in deploying a mission in Somalia, the AU is acting on behalf of the UN Security Council, which has the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and aims at creating conditions conducive for long-term stabilization and reconstruction of Somalia. On the humanitarian situation, honorable members may be fully aware that Somalia has been hit hardest by the current drought, which has caused an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe marked by famine, loss of livelihood, and indeed other consequences. It has also displaced many people as they search for grazing land for their severely threatened livestock. In this regard, the PSC has continued to call for more enhanced humanitarian support to be extended to the federal government of Somalia and to the Somali people in general for purposes of drought mitigation to the affected population. With regard to the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the national dialogue facilitated by the former Prime Minister of Togo and a member of the AU panel of the WISE, Mr. Edem Kojo, yielded two important agreements that were signed in October and in December 2016, respectively. The Catholic bishops and indeed the leaders of the region played a pivotal role. However, the situation in DRC is not entirely settled, as the opposition continues to have issues. And you just heard from the representative of the European Parliament the concerns that have been outlined. The PSC hopes that the recent gesture by His Excellency President Kabila to nominate a broad-based government will restore confidence in the political atmosphere in the DRC. The DRC government will also need to fully implement the provisions of the Nairobi Agreement relating to the M23 so that permanent stability is restored in the eastern part of the country. M23 is not the only negative forces there. There are many other fighting forces in that part of the country. The PSC has also urged MONUSCO and the government of the Congolese army to harmonize their positions so that operations of the intervention brigade against negative forces in eastern DRC resume. In Mali and the Sahel, the situation has been marked by the pursuit of efforts to implement the agreement for peace and reconciliation in Mali. There has been some progress in the process of establishment of interim state authorities in the 5 regions in northern Mali and the convening of the Conference of National Accord. However, the PS is concerned about the slow pace of implementation of the agreement and the escalation of terrorist attacks, particularly in northern and central parts of the country against the Malian armed forces and the international forces, MINUSMA, and forces serving under Operation Barkhane. At its 679th meeting, held on 13th April 2017, the PSC endorsed the G5 Sahel strategic concept of operations for the speedy deployment of a regional intervention force in northern Mali to combat terrorist and criminal groups operating in this part of the country. As PSC, we welcome the efforts by the countries of the region within the framework of the Nouakchott process and the G5 Sahel in the fight against terrorism and transnational organized crimes. The G5 Sahel Joint Force will be fighting terrorism, drug and human trafficking. It will also be involved in contributing as necessary to the restoration of state authority and the return of IDPs, as well as in facilitating delivery of humanitarian assistance. Looking ahead, the PSC stresses the importance of establishing a strong and credible Malian national defense and security force, and of implementing the agreement in its letter and spirit. As with other country situations, the PSC is following closely the evolution of the situation on the ground. In Libya, the political, security, and humanitarian situation remains of great concern and requires urgent attention. The PSC continues to closely follow the situation to make sure that the Libyan political agreement is fully implemented. Looking ahead, the AU, through the High Representative for Libya, former President of Tanzania, His Excellency Jakaya Kikwete, intends to play an enhanced role both in assisting the new Libyan government through concrete actions, including assisting in efforts aimed at security sector reform and national reconciliation. The AU also intends to contribute to the strengthening of existing regional security arrangements, including the Nouakchott process as an intelligence gathering and sharing platform, to better prevent extremist groups based in Libya from launching attacks in the region and in the neighboring countries. In Sudan, the situation relating to the national dialogue, cessation of hostilities in Darfur, and the two areas of Blue Nile and Southern Kordofan remain unresolved to date. At its recent briefing on the situation in Darfur and the activities of the African Union, United Nations hybrid operation in Darfur, the PSC was informed that the security situation in Darfur has significantly improved, including in the restive rebel Mara area of central Darfur. Regarding the exit strategy for UNAMID, the PSC was informed that the tripartite working group had already concluded its work and submitted its report, and that what remained was implementation of the recommendations made. The PSC looks forward to receiving and considering that report. From 15th to 18th May 2017, that is next week, the PSC will be undertaking a field mission to Sudan in order to take stock and get first-hand information regarding the current political, security, and humanitarian situation in Darfur and the country as a whole. The Western Sahara conflict, which has been on the decolonization agenda of the United Nations for over 50 years, remains unresolved to date. The AU's position is clear in this case. Western Sahara is one of the few remaining cases of decolonization on the AU agenda, and it deserves a final solution to ensure that the Sahrawi people express their will through a referendum for self-determination. It is hoped that with Morocco's readmission as a member of the AU, the process of solving the issue of Western Sahara will be expedited. The recent UN Security Council resolution and the withdrawal of forces of both parties, that is the government of Morocco and Polisario, from Guégarat, are sources of some hope. Right, Honorable Speaker, honorable members of PAP, besides the country-specific conflict and crisis situations that I have highlighted, the PSC also focused its attention on a number of other important thematic areas. Among these thematic areas are the following: the fight against hate crimes and the ideology of genocide in Africa, peace, justice, accountability, and national reconciliation, the role of women in saving lives in dangerous security environments, post-conflict reconstruction and development, African standby force, as well as AU's early warning capacity. In the course of discharging its mandate, the PSC has particularly identified the following challenges. A, our continental early warning system remains weak and needs to be strengthened. B, there are persistent financing constraints, especially of AU-led peace support missions. But on this, I wish to report that the heads of state in their last two summits have resolved to play a positive role regarding the financing of their agenda. We are hoping that this financing shall no longer be dependent on external sources. C, our programs on post-conflict reconstruction and development need to be strengthened. D, many member states on the African continent need to undergo security sector reforms. We have reached this latter conclusion as a result of those member states that contribute troops to AU peace support operations. In some cases, we have found some of the troops wanting. Besides the country-specific conflict and crisis situations that I have highlighted, the PSC also focused its attention on a number of other important sorry, that was a repetition. The other issue we have emphasized is the importance of ensuring strong governance structures and the holding of periodic elections in Africa. The PSC would appreciate if this parliament could encourage member states to sign, ratify, and domesticate all existing AU normative instruments. Putting in place instruments and implementing them is one of the ways to prevent violent conflicts and instability in our continent. Right, Honorable Speaker, honorable members of Parliament, in conclusion, I would like to stress that in order to achieve our goal of silencing the guns in Africa by 2020, it is critical that we further enhance our conflict prevention capabilities. We need also to enhance our conflict management and conflict resolution capabilities. It is in this regard that I would like to encourage all AU sister organizations, particularly this parliament, to also take full advantage of all available tools for structural conflict prevention, management, and resolution. Last but not least, I wish to reiterate the sincere appreciation of the Peace and Security Council to the relentless efforts of the Pan-African Parliament, which in a large measure also contributes very significantly toward the promotion of peace, stability, democracy, and prosperity of our continent. I wish this session fruitful deliberations. I thank you all.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur,
Your Excellency, Ambassador, we would like to thank you for the report you've just presented. I would like to remind our colleagues that the document that the Ambassador requested to be withdrawn was the one we received from the African Union. So we apologize if there's an error in the document, and we apologize now. You have listened closely to the presentation made by His Excellency. I have before me a list of 46 speakers. If we grant 3 minutes to each speaker, it will take us 150 minutes, and then the Ambassador will reply. I would therefore like to ask the honorable members to be very concise and ask your questions if you have questions, and to leave time for the Ambassador to respond. This is a midterm report. We will receive another report in October, as we did in Sharm el-Sheikh. So this is the midterm report that the Ambassador has just presented. So make some suggestions and ask your questions to the Ambassador. The first speaker on my list is His Excellency Honorable Dr. Bernadette Lahaye from Sierra Leone.
motion.
Point of order. You have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of Allah, the Compassionate and the Merciful, I would like to thank you all. The point of order here is on the first issue. There is a request made by the State of Palestine to be granted observer status within the Pan-African Parliament, and I thought that would be on the agenda today. Unfortunately, we see that it is not the case. As a result, I would like to request that we grant this request. Secondly, before I took the floor, I would like to say I'm not accusing anyone, but I would like to talk about the legal provisions that should apply to this parliament. I myself am part of the Agriculture, Environment, Development Committee, and we have a draft agreement that was debated. This is a draft that has been taken into consideration by all the parliaments in the world. In this context, it should be presented to the Bureau of the Pan-African Parliament and subsequently be brought to the relevant authorities. And once there's approval and endorsement of this agreement, it must be tabled in the plenary. But according to what I heard yesterday, the experts that need to consider this have our full respect, but this agreement should be adopted on behalf of the people of Africa represented here in this parliament. And that is why we should support and adopt it by acclamation. That should be the case within this Parliament with all agreements. It is only in logic and necessary. We cannot ignore the role of the Pan-African Parliament and then delegate it to another instance. We have to take note that although the rules of procedure of the Parliament stipulate that the agreement can be adopted in such a way, but we should be able to bring about amendments to these agreements. I thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleague. Now, in the first part of the point of order, let me refer to the rules of procedure that stipulate that the observer status is adopted in plenary. And the request that was made was sent to the Committee on Cooperation, which I consider is the right committee to make a decision, as this committee is in charge of international relations. Given that the rules of procedure are very clear about this process, an interim report was issued by the Committee on Rules, and we requested the opinion of this committee. And there is a plenary session set aside for the adoption of all motions, so I don't want to give you the contents of the report issued by the Committee on International Corporations. However, in the conclusion, it transpires that Palestine is already an observer at the African Union, and the Pan-African Parliament, as an organ of the African Union, should align our position with that of the African Union. So this is what I can say. But we have a whole plenary session reserved for the adoption of these motions, when you will have a reply to your request. As for the second issue, you're referring to the Committee on Agriculture. Well, dear colleagues, I would like to beg your indulgence that we discuss the item on our agenda today, and what occurred will be considered when we adopt the resolutions. If there are no other points of order or motions, I would like to start giving the floor to the list of speakers. And I give the floor now to the list of speakers. You have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. Good morning. What is this, a motion, or are you taking the floor? Yes, it's a motion, says the speaker. This is a motion I would like to put to this plenary. There are Palestinian members of parliament in prisons who are suffering abuse. An initiative was launched from the prison in which our great militant Nelson Mandela was, for the expression of solidarity and assistance to the Palestinian prisoners who are members of parliament, who are in very poor conditions in detention. And therefore, I would like to request that our parliament sends a strong message that this contest movement of the prisoners who are in very poor conditions and who have embarked on a hunger strike. Thank you. Dear colleagues, you know your rules of procedure. If you have a motion, you have to introduce it properly. We will debate on it and take a decision. That is in accordance with the rules of procedure. So the motion should be drawn up and sent to the Secretariat, who will plan for a discussion on that, and then we will take action. This being said, may I now continue to give the floor to the speakers concerning the topic of the morning. I give the floor to Honorable Dr. Bernado.
Please. Excuse me.
Yes. Yes.
I also want to bring the motion on this peace and security issue. Mr. President, our people are evacuating and losing their lives and their assets in different parts of our continent, so that we need to pass a resolution on the peace and security issue. In this regard, I would ask this House to pass a resolution and to bring a motion of. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, there will be resolutions that will be adopted, but if you have a specific resolution, please send it to the Secretariat. There is no problem. But bringing a motion like that and requesting for an adoption is a breach of the procedure stipulated in our rules. Another motion.
Mr. President, please, we have a rules of procedure book which we should all follow. If we continue to allow people to stand up on point of orders and bring in motions, we're totally against the rules of procedure. We all know what you do, Mr. President. I suggest we continue with the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleague. You know, the members of parliament are here to speak, and I cannot refuse to give the floor to someone. According to the rules of procedure, each member of parliament can raise his hand and bring a motion. But you reminded us of the procedure that needs to be followed, so that is my response. Dr. Benalet, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me first of all thank the FAO Director General Representative, who earlier on brought facilitations from the Director General and also gave us adequate information on the situation of food and nutrition in Africa. And we want to thank them for the collaboration we are having with them in the Pan-African Parliament. Let me also thank His Excellency Ambassador Katende for giving us this update. I know in October, in May in Sharm el-Sheikh, we are also given an update. We are happy to know that between May last year and now, some progress has been made, while also some challenges still remain. We appreciate the release of the Chibok girls by the Boko Haram. We want to continue to entreat the president and his government of Nigeria to continue negotiations so that the remaining number of girls will all be returned to their respective families. We also appreciate the success that Somalia is recording. They have done a peaceful elections, and they now have a government in place, and the modalities are being put in place to sustain and deepen their democracy. But we also note with sadness that challenges still remain, for example, in South Sudan, in DRC, in Mali, Sahel, Libya, Sudan, and even Western Sahara. But we also hope that while these challenges are being addressed, we want PSC to also continue to look at the causes of the conflict. We want us to continue to deepen human rights. We want to continue to uphold the rule of law. We want to continue to be inclusive in our democratic process. We want to continue to ensure that women and girls and youth are given their rightful place in the society. We want our governments to continue to provide the basic social services for its people, because these are some of the reasons of the war. We also want to entreat the PSC to consider collaborating in a more sustained manner with the International Cooperation and Conflict Resolution Committee in this parliament. We want them, every time there is fact-finding missions, to also go with this committee, so that at the end of the day, we may have parallel reports by both the PSC and the Committee on this on International Cooperation, because this is what normally used to do. When PSC contributes, we also have contribution from our own parliamentary committee so that they both complement each other, because sometimes when they go on these fact-finding missions, they may be looking at different dimensions. We want to see all those dimensions only happen if the two.
Thank you, colleague. Thank you, Honorable. I would like to request, dear colleagues, to accept that on your behalf I extend congratulations and thanks to Ambassador Mull. That will enable you to go straight to the point. You don't have to congratulate him again.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur,
You have the thanks from the Pan-African Parliament.
برلماني إفريقيا.
Andy Cecilia Manela from South Africa.
Micro.
Microphone.
Peace and security is a necessity. And Africa is plunged into a bloodbath. And that is because it's our women and children in most times that are the victims. I'll again say thanks for our young girls who have been brought back to our communities. But what are we doing as parents of those little girls who, in the process of crime, have been mentally and physically damaged? What I was saying about the supply of arms to Boko Haram, for instance, why can't we stand up as Africa and say no more arms? At the end of the day, it's a pity because it's just women in the front. Yes, they are men, but the majority of the people who are fighting for the eradication of arms, the stoppage of and the uprooting of actually taking our children away from us, the encouragement of our children being sold to other countries as slaves, sex slaves, has to come to an end. And I plead with every South African, whether man or woman, to stand up and say, enough is enough. Let's really fight this scourge. And at the same time, remember what is happening to our Sahrawi women, because it's going to end up with elimination of quite a lot of our children and women who are still languishing in jails. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like now to recognize Honorable Khaltoum Abdel Karim Suleiman from Sudan. In the name of Allah, thank you, Mr. President. I thank the members of the Pan-African Parliament. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to greet or to commend the ambassador for the clarifications provided to us on what is happening in terms of conflicts, of wars, and in terms of the developments that have occurred in the field of counterterrorism in our continent. We as Africans must provide the necessary support to the Peace and Security Council of the African Union to help them secure and preserve the security of our continent. Mr. President, we need to work more with the Peace and Security Council in order to silence the guns and to make sure that our peoples live in peace and prosperity, and to ensure a better future for our children. Mr. President, all of us aspire to peace and security and hate wars. We in Sudan, we have suffered for more than 10 years from war and conflicts in Darfur and Kordofan and the Blue Nile. And last year, the government called for the opening of a national dialogue. Thank you very much, dear colleague. I now give the floor to the Honorable Suleiman El Mahmoud. What did you say? I've already given the floor to another member. I have other things to say, Mr. President. I haven't finished. Don't I have the right to speak?
Non, c'est pas ce qu'on a dit. On a dit.
This is not what we said. We said that we have only 3 minutes and your time is over. Can I please ask for 1 minute?
Ouais, 1 minute. Allez.
You have it, madam. Go ahead. This dialogue that has included all the categories of our society, and this led to an agreement that led to peace and stability in these regions. And now our government is calling for the involvement and the participation for the rebel groups and the opponents, the political opponents who were not involved in the war, to take part to the government. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not going to give the floor if the microphone is cut off. Honorable Soleima, you have the floor now.
Gracias, señor presidente. Felicito, quiero aprovechar para felicitar.
Point of order, Mr. President. Point of order.
Point on.
Mr. President, is it in order that members from those countries mentioned in the report are given 2 minutes to address their issues? Is that in order, Mr. President? Thank you very much.
Honorable.
Honorable, if you wish, if so you wish, we can remain here till tomorrow. I'm not the one who have decided about the rules of procedures. I'm just enforcing it, and I think that the ambassador came here to inform us. It is to answer to the ambassador, or what are we going to do? He provided us with information. If you have something to say, you just raise your concern. We're not here exchanging or having a dialogue. It's not a dialogue. It's just an exchange of information. And if you have something, any question to the ambassador, please just raise it, and that's it. You can complement the report in 2 or 3 minutes. You have the floor, Madam Suleiman.
Thank you very much. I would like to add my voice to that of my colleagues to congratulate His Excellency Ambassador Mulkatendi, representative from the Peace and Security Council of the African Union. I would like to inform you that in the report there is an omission of the current situation concerning human rights in occupied Western Sahara. Despite the fact that Morocco is now part of the African Union, we have not seen any tangible willingness to bring a solution or to improve the situation. And our understanding is that not long ago, the Peace and Security Council had a meeting on this issue, invited Morocco, but Morocco wasn't present. Morocco went to the United Nations. The representative of Polisario, representative of Western Sahara was present. Morocco wasn't present. So this shows that there is no willingness to seek a solution. In addition, currently there are on trial in Morocco, the illegal trial, our companions from Western Sahara, political prisoners, for only having claimed their rights and shown their condemnation and rejection for Moroccan occupation in 2010 in a camp of more than 35,000 Sahrawis who in peace disclaimed their right to self-determination and independence for the people of Western Sahara. Thank you very much, dear colleague.
I now give the floor to Honorable Hashim.
1 minute, please, 1 minute. I give the floor to Honorable Usman. Please take the floor. Dear colleague, with all my respect, please.
1 minute.
1 minute, please.
I thank you, Mr. President, and I would like to thank the presenters, the two presenters. My question is these groups, these terrorist groups throughout the world and in Africa, where do they get the money and the weapons and the training, the drillings from? And why isn't there any sanctions imposed by the United Nations? As far as the situation in Sudan is concerned, we have been experiencing a very difficult situation before 10 years now, but now the situation is improving and the peace and stability are prevailing in Darfur. In Sudan, generally, President Omar al-Bashir has undertaken an initiative to involve all the opponents, and it is this initiative is leading to the formation of a government, of a new government that would involve all the opponents and would involve more than 95 parties. I would like to commend the efforts made by the Peace and Security Council of the African Union Commission, and also commend appreciate the development that is occurring in our country in this respect, despite the scarce resources that we have. And I would like to say that what is happening in South Sudan, there should be an efficient and strong role to be played to make sure that we put a definite end to the war. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleague. I now give the floor to Honorable Oscar Usaman Olududu from the DRC. I thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity. I would have wished to have more time to express myself because our country is misunderstood. What is happening, what is said about our country is said by people that are in hotel rooms and not in on the field. Let me, in some words, say what's happening actually. So first, what's happening in the DRC is not of surprise. The DRC is considered to be a beautiful girl that is sought for by many men and should be protected by her husband. This beautiful girl is sought for by Europeans, by multinationals, and all those who wish to create trouble in our countries. But the husband is Africa. The husband is the Pan-African Parliament that must implement the ideals of our ancestors, of our father founders, Lumumba and others, who said that the history of Africa should be written by Africans. Are we doing so? What happened, actually? When the European Parliament speaks of targeted sanctions in Africa, for what interest do they do so? When we say that the UN staff have been killed in the DRC, there was a huge problem, a huge issue about that. And then they sent policemen and thousands of Congolese have been killed. So does that mean that aren't Congolese members of the UN? Isn't this injustice? So these countries, our colonizers, should or gather in their countries, our opponents, let them create troubles and disorder in our countries. I thank you, my dear colleague. We did understand you. I now give the floor to Honorable Joseph Monefe from Botswana.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity. Mr. President, peace and security is very important for Africa continent to live forward and develop and prosper. Therefore, the African Agenda 63 in a conflict environment. Our aspirations for continental free trade areas, free movement of people, borderless continent need a lot to be done on the area of security. I call upon African leaders here to up their business in management of peace. Mr. President, I concur with the ambassador that we as legislators, we must advocate for African leaders to improve our capacity on governance. We must respect our country constitutions and never to dishonor the value of our constitutions. African Union also must continue with its good effort to monitor indicators of a failed state, and I advise appropriate actions to be taken before such states go into anarchy. We must lobby for African leaders or governments to find alternative ways and means to manage peace. I do not encourage African states to wage wars as a means or a way to extend their policies, as war cannot benefit our African continent. Mr. President, we are aware that these conflicts, they precipitate poverty. And poverty, as we are all aware, is prevalent in most of our African countries. It constitutes danger to prosperity and development. I encourage African governments to incorporate in their national development plan a poverty eradication program that will leapfrog and assist in ensuring the development and in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. In conclusion, Mr. President, We must advocate for African states to balance law, politics, and governance. These three must be balanced for us to be able to maintain peace and manage conflicts. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher collègue.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. I now give the floor to Honorable Nora Vindeti from Namibia.
Laura.
Honorable Laura.
President. Mr. President, allow me to also air my view on peace and security in Africa. And let me start by saying peace and security in Africa is indeed important to the African agenda. Let's note that without peace and security, there can be no sustainable development. And without sustainable development, there can be no peace and security, and the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals in Africa will remain a dream deferred. Africa needs peace, not war. Mr. President, let us remember and take note that Africa has gradually improved across all measurements of death and war. These positive changes are due to several factors, including greater regional cooperation, decrease in interstate wars, economic growth, and increased democratic governance. The type of conflict have also changed from wars of independence, long-term civil wars, and interstate wars. Conflicts are now due to weak governance structures and state presence, which are exacerbated by regional, religious, and ethnic differences, as well as to transnational crimes and global governance failures. Mr. President, therefore, it is important for the leaders in Africa to recognize the positive changes in Africa's security situation and to reinforce the underlying trends leading to a more peaceful Africa. In Africa, political changes is also driving trends in peace and security. Increase in crime is a deep concern on the continent. Unemployment of youth living in slums with little hope for advancement are also.
Merci beaucoup, cher collègue.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. And I'll give the floor to Honorable Samir Cissé from Guinea-Conakry.
Monsieur le Président.
I thank you, Mr. President. This morning's theme is of the utmost importance. The first level of or driver for development is security. Africa should wonder why the war hotspots do exist in Africa. I think that dedication and perseverance are the two drivers of success to vanquish this plague. We need to fight against the hotspots of tensions, and the government should have efficient warning systems. Our prevention capacity and capability and ability to prevent conflicts will enable the emergence of peace and development. Mr. President, I have two major questions, important questions. Where are we in the establishment of a continental force? Is the African Union enough tooled to prevent conflicts? These are my two major concerns. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to Honorable Manuel Zeca from Mozambique.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Gostaria que o esforço do Conselho de Segurança da União Africana não se limitasse apenas ao calar das armas. A paz e
all this is not limited. The efforts of peace and security has a lot to do with the way governments are elected after and how they implement the rules of democracy and the rule of law. The example of my country, Mozambique, in 2016, we had a wave of violence and lack of respect for the democratic rules in the election process of 2014. But given the high level of political responsibility, political social responsibility of the president of Renamo, since 2016, the president said that we need to respect peace, and the government insisted on having a peaceful environment, and we hope that in a few days we will be able to sign a peace agreement that would include a deep governmental and administrative reform. So peace and security for me have not only to do with the ceasefire, but also with democracy and the rule of law. And I think that the Pan-African Parliament and the African Union should spare no effort to make sure that peace and security is effective in Africa. Thank you. I now give the floor to Honorable Martin Say from Burundi. I thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Peace and security in Africa are a source of concerns for all of us, and I think that the Peace and Security Council should ask one single question. Whose interest is the peace, the destabilization of Africa? If we find a question, an answer, to this question, we will be able to make peace and security prevail in Africa. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor now to Honorable Ongons Felix from Uganda.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm addressing members of Parliament. I'm addressing leaders of Africa. Leaders of Africa, when are we going to have the destiny of Africa in our hands? When are we? Mr. President, today we are talking about security and peace in Africa. Where are we? Do we have a standing force, African standing force here in Africa? When you go to Congo, it is the UN. When you go to Darfur, it's the UN. When you go to other countries, the UN taking our peace. In this statement, the ambassador made it very clear that AU is acting on behalf of the UN Security Council. How can we act on behalf of the UN Security Council? Are we not acting on our own behalf? It means we have left the destiny, the agenda of Africa in the hands of other people. And therefore, let me ask the ambassador, are you talking about the facilitators of peace in Africa? Do we have the facilitators of crime and insecurity in Africa? We need to know it. Are we able to address them? Some facilitators are outside the control of Africa. It is foreign. Honorable members, when Libya was attacked, what do we say as Africans? Foreign aggression on Libya, and now there's total chaos in Libya. What are we saying about it? There are chaos in many parts of Africa, which is foreign. Honorable members, let us take the destiny of Africa in our own hands. I want to propose, Mr. President, that we must have a UN, our African code.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, dear colleague. I now give the floor to Honorable Abdallah Barka Ibrahim from Djibouti. Honorable Barka, I give the floor to Honorable Joseph Manga from Cameroon.
I am from Cameroon, and I want to make an interpellation to PSC to put Cameroon on the agenda. Cameroon is a bicultural, bijural country that is made up of one part English-speaking and the other French-speaking. The English-speaking sector of Cameroon has since October been under siege, almost, because we lost even internet, schools are closed, lawyers are on strike, courts are not acting, And all this is because there's been some sort of marginalization. Today, it is a question now of clamoring for independence. We are about to leave another situation of the Sahrawi Republic. The English-speaking sector has already even gone as far as producing the name of a new country, creating a currency, confecting a flag, and are claiming to be independent. Please put Cameroon on the agenda before it becomes too late. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
I thank you very much. I now recognize Honorable Feline Besto, Diera from Cape Verde.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Queria, em nome de Cabo Verde,
I thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of Cape Verde, I would like to commend His Excellency the Ambassador for the presentation on peace and security on our continent. Would like to congratulate him for all the initiatives taken by the African Union and the Peace and Security Council to resolve conflicts and to guarantee peace and security. For us, governance, peace and security are themes that are absolutely important to guarantee and the respects and the goals, achieve the goals of sustainable development. And this idea to have close links and ties between our Parliament and the African Union Commission to promote the ideals of peace, integration, security, and stability. We believe that without peace, without democracy, without freedom, without the rule of law, there cannot be any development. Therefore, we should make sure and do our utmost so that peace be the central element of our public policies. To conclude, allow me to tell you, as it was, there was the miracle of the Christ. We, the politicians, have the duty, ethical and moral duty, to make the miracle of peace and to give our people peace, freedom, security, dignity, and social welfare. I thank you. Thank you. I recognize the Honorable Tanzania from Tanzania.
Rais kwa nafasi hii ya kuchangia. Mheshimiwa Rais,
President, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me this opportunity. I'm not getting it. What's happening? Micro. President, Mr. President, our continent is at a better time than before because there isn't any civil war, but I'd like to commend the efforts by the government of DRC and that of and Egypt and all countries which have been mentioned in this report, which are making efforts to ensure that there is that there is peace and security, durable peace and security. Excellency, we haven't done much as a parliament to assist our brothers and sisters in the Sahrawi region. I'd like to ask Ambassador Katende. He has explained the problems in those countries, but has not explained who is causing those problems. What has the Peace and the Security Council or the African Union done to make sure that the perpetrators of those acts are taken taken into account? So what are we doing to ensure that Africa continues to work for peace and security? We know that many crises and wars have been caused by Western countries, which supply the wars. But as a continent, we have not. Samahani sasa
is now given to Professor Uganga Latiko Morris.
And let me take this opportunity
although you had told us not to convey our congratulations to the ambassador who made a presentation. He's the ambassador from my country. He's been transferred to Algeria, and we thank him for his good work there. There's only one element that is so important from the statement of the ambassador. That is the absence of provisions to ensure that there are no reoccurrence of insecurity in Africa. And the challenge that we, Africa, face is really democratizing, providing leadership for posterity rather than for self, for corruption and self-interest. And therefore, I would like to suggest that we should invest more in ensuring that elections in Africa are free. They're not repetitive, but free of mischief. Secondly, when you're in governance, you govern for the whole people of that country and this continent. When we avoid corruption, we invest in the youth, because the youth challenge for Africa is going to be one element that will be the greatest insecurity that Africa will face. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, dear colleagues. The floor is to the Honorable Saleh Abdurrahman Musa of the Sahrawi Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس وأشكر كذلك السيد سفير على
Thank you, Chairperson. I would like to thank the Honorable Ambassador for his report. When we looked at the report with respect to Western Sahara, we can see here that in actual fact is a general report. There is no mention therein of the efforts of AU or the efforts of the Peace and Security Council with respect to the Sahrawi issue, which is the last case of colonialism in Africa. Chair, we have to talk about the efforts deployed by the African Union. Alternatively, talk about the efforts deployed by the AU Peace and Security Council. And in that manner, these efforts have to be brought to the attention of the parliamentarians so that they can respond adequately to the questions that we are asking. We do know that on the 28th of March in Addis Ababa, the Peace and Security Council adopted important decisions as well as other recommendations which were made. So, Chair, I would like to have information with respect to what is the situation with respect to the decision taken by the European Court of Justice with respect to the issues with Morocco. Every issue dealing with this Western Sahara conflict, the parliamentarians have to know what is the latest progress made with respect to the Western Sahara issue. I thank you, Chair.
Muito obrigada, Senhor Presidente, pela concessão da palavra.
I would like to thank you, Chairperson, for giving me the floor. I would also like to acknowledge the presentation on the situation of peace and security in Africa, because it gives us an idea of the peace and security situation in Africa. Dear colleagues, I would like to reassure you here and to say that in Mozambique, we have peace because our president favors dialogue and not weapons. The president has my president has always said that peace would only be available in Mozambique thanks to dialogue. Peace is a mindset, is a feeling of well-being, harmony. When you talk about peace, what comes to our mind is security. Also, the fact that one is protected or not being a victim of bad things. Unfortunately, our continent is affected by insecurity issues, in most cases imposed by those who fabricate the weapons and who want to loot our resources so that they can develop their own economies. As an African, we have to be aware that it is only the spirit of reconciliation and mutual solidarity which will enable us to have sustainable peace. Peace is an engine of development for all the countries, so we have to fight for effective peace in Africa whilst privileging dialogue with respect to resolving our conflicts. No to war and yes to peace. I thank you for your attention, Mr. Chairman. I would like you to cope about peace with respect to the people that we are here to represent. We are here to accomplish our task. So I will give the floor to the Honorable Mbeya from Central Africa. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Martha Nitere of Burundi and Okot Ogong of Uganda have placed particular emphasis on the outside causes of conflicts in our continent. With respect to the French-speaking countries, we do know how the influence of the former colonizer is strong with respect to crisis our states experiences. Our states are victims of resources, raw materials, that are found in our continent, and it's the case of our country. I have not had any mention being made on the Central African crisis, but this country is in crisis. More than 12,000 blue helmets are in Central Africa, but despite their presence, the crisis is actually accentuated. So we believe that given that the crisis has not been resolved, there is need to commit ourselves to discussion, dialogue. And besides, the African Union encourages our government to follow that direction, and we would like a resolution to be taken, to be adopted, so that we can go in that direction, because it's only inclusive, national inclusive dialogue, which brings together all the sectors. That is the only way we can attain peace. Thank you, dear colleague. The floor is to Honorable May Mahmoud Ibrahim of Egypt. I would like to thank you, Right Honorable Speaker. The experience has shown that there is a report, a linkage between peace and security and poverty and ignorance, and which has impeded the growth rate in our countries, and this has an influence on the other. We are among African countries. We are members of United Nations, and today we are talking about Sudan, Libya, Somalia, to name a few, but we should not forget Syria and Palestine. The challenges that we have to face, one has to react in an integrated manner, and as an African continent, we have to be at the forefront of what should be done, because we do have experience in such issues, in issues of peace and security in the African continent. Mr. Speaker, distinguished parliamentarians, we do have a vision which should be taken not only by limiting it to the African continent, but the world in its entirety. We also have religious discourse. All that we have to do is to fight against terrorism. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the floor. I would also like to take the floor at this juncture because to enable me to share with you information with respect to the situation of peace and security in our continent. We can confirm here that our continent is sick, given the various conflicts that affect Africa. There are a lot of broader countries that are suffering. There are killings, violations of human rights, So the cradle of humanity is away from peace. The peace needed for it to go towards development, harmonious development of its people. Chair, our countries have noted that every day there are refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo, more than 20,000 refugees, including 4,000 children, and some of these children are there without their parents. As you can see, the citizens of our neighboring countries have lost everything except their lives. We jointly with the United Nations organizations, we are trying to assist these refugees. And as you know, there is nothing better than feeling at home. So we need to neutralize the negative forces who perpetrate atrocious crimes reminiscent of the Middle age. So the African Union should assist the various parties intervening in the conflicts to put an end to the guns and put in place discussions. Thank you, Honorable. We now give the floor to the Tunisian delegate. Right, Honorable Speaker of the Parliament, dear colleagues, the security situation in Africa was adequately summarized by the Nobel Prize of Peace, who stated that there would not be any more wars in the world as long as there are, as long as people are hungry. This was said 40 years ago, and today we are not talking about just eating or clothing oneself. Today we have to fight against violence. So for this, we need technology, we need democracy, we need a decent standard of living. Today, Africa is experiencing, well, some countries in Africa are occupied by soldiers. We have legislation which are obsolete. We have legislation which were enacted since 1945, whilst we gained our independence since the 1950s. The President of the European Parliament talked about an African country, and I believe he was referring to the people of that particular country. So I would like to ask Europe, what have you done to stop the arrival of weapons in Africa? What did you do, Europe, to ensure that there is a return? What are you doing to stop the neocolonialism which is impeding the progress? Then the Qatari from the Sahrawi Republic. Jamel. Thank you, Mr. President. With respect to this report and with respect to the Western Sahara situation, it should be stated that this document does not translate the position of the African Union. This paragraph is not strongly worded and does not reflect what the Peace and Security Council of the African Union have done. And this is the last colony existing in Africa. This has to be acknowledged. It would have been better for the Honorable Ambassador to tell us what the African Union did, what the Peace and Security Council did currently. Morocco did not even attend these Peace and Security Council meetings. So now all that we are told is that there is the re-entry of Morocco, but this would not be in the interest of the reenactment of the African Union. You know, when we requested Morocco to be present here. Morocco refused. You can see over so many years we have lost our citizens who were killed. Now, what was the fault? How can we be criticized for saying that our country is an occupied country? We all know that the Sahrawi nationals are killed. Everybody is aware. The observers, foreign observers, cannot even enter the country to see what is transpiring on the ground. Why don't you allow them to enter the country? The floor is now to Honorable Mangoni Mohamed Mita of Tanzania.
Mboni Mohamed de la Tanzanie.
Mohamed of Tanzania. Honorable Aminata Nyang of Mauritania, you have the floor. The floor is now given to Honorable Evelyn Botule of Burundi. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the opportunity of taking the floor. Peace and security is a topical issue for our country, a concern of all Africans. We should commit ourselves to ensure the stability of our continent, so it is Africa which is losing its sons and daughters, children who are losing their lives because they are used to commit these barbaric acts. We should stop all these hostilities. As Africans, we should ask ourselves why, and we should ask the perpetrators and the victims to explain. Now, what are the profound causes? The wealth of our country, but also the poverty of our people, high unemployment rates, and therefore the African leaders have to take ownership of this fight for ensuring stability in our continent, and thereafter they have to put in place more, programs for peace, civic education, and what actually is being done is in what is actually is being done in Burundi. We have reconciliation programs, employment programs to put an end to the crisis which is affecting our country. I thank you. Thank you. The floor is given to Honorable Dr. Zanigatu Diallo of Guinea-Conakry. Thank you, Chairperson, President. I actually had a lot to say, but then the honorable parliamentarians have taken the wind out of my sails. So I would like to concentrate on an event which occurred already underscored by Honorable Jean Souvenu of South Sudan, namely what happened in Cairo on the 5th of May. I would like to tell you the way I see things in the presence of an African Union personality. When we arrived in Algeria after observing the elections on the 5th of May in Cairo, 3 parliamentarians of the parliament, PAP had encountered serious difficulties. This might be a normal act. It would have been considered a normal act if we were not 3 people. So 3 police officers had the same reaction, and they told us to submit our country passports and not the passports of the African Union. Given that I was welcomed by the staff from my embassy, they categorically refused. They said she is a diplomat, she is a Pan-African parliamentarian, and this passport has been put into circulation. So they requested us to refer to Foreign Affairs before we were allowed entry. We were 3. The Honorable Parliamentarian of Sudan presented his passport and he was given entry, but we rested because we demanded. We waited for 45 minutes before we had any answer. We went back later because thank you, dear colleague. Thank you, dear colleague. The floor is now to Honorable Ernesto Joaquim Mulato. Thank you, Chairperson.
Pas de point d'ordre. Vous ne réagissez pas à la...
We would respond adequately. Parliamentarian Jacques, you have the floor. I thank you, Mr. President. The issue of peace and security in our continent is indeed a topical issue, even here in PAP. I concur with what my colleagues said, who referred to Angola and Professor Oben of Uganda, because they are referring to the main issues, the difficulties with respect to conflict resolution in our continent. Additionally, they have also talked about the fundamental issues relating to the causes of the conflicts, namely bad governance, additionally, there are factors which are responsible for instability in our countries. With respect to conflicts, if you take the case of the DRC, I believe that the countries that are involved militarily in this country should we have difficulties in putting an end to conflicts. When the workshop on terrorism was convened here, we found out that we call upon the countries to stop the rebels. Apart from the regular forces, there should be we will now give the floor to the Honorable Inya Kilebu Abanda of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me the floor. I will be very pragmatic because my concerns have been taken on board by those who took the floor before me. Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say one thing. Africa is dreaming. We are in the process of waking up because in 1974, when Alain Périphérique had written that when China would wake up, the world would be on its knees. At that time, everybody was criticizing China for human rights, arrest, arbitrary arrest, and 43 years after, the world is kneeling before China. So, Africa, let us assume our responsibilities. Let us assume our responsibilities. This will never come from outside. So, Frantz Fanon had also said that Africa looks like a revolver, and the trigger is found in the DRC. My country, we have to be careful not to allow RDC to explode because we are surrounded by 9 countries, east, west, north, south. If Congo explodes, Africa would also explode. The ambassador, thank you, dear colleagues. The floor is now. Dear colleague, may you be seated, please. May you be seated, please, dear colleague.
Veuillez vous asseoir, cher.
Dear colleague, please be seated. We have followed you closely, and the Honorable Ambassador has done so. I would now give the floor to Honorable Mohamed Mubarak Mutata from Ghana.
Mr. President, let me start by saying that while we have not changed our behavior significantly, we continue to do the things that we do, we cannot expect to have a drastic different results. Mr. President, let me say the absence of war is not peace. So even our target of saying that silencing the guns by 2020 cannot guarantee us peace. It can only take us a step towards peace. I perfectly agree with most of my colleagues who were talking about the root cause of the conflict. If we don't wake up to change our behaviors to the root cause of conflict, unfortunately, Africa will continue to be engulfed with conflict. What are some of the things that all of us do, including myself, that we need to change if we really want to get improvement? Intolerance. We are very intolerant. We teach our children in the home how to hate others. Mr. President, until we all wake up to the reality that this is a real challenge, we'll continue to be engulfed by challenges. What do? We take it into politics. Politics has now become in Africa a business of patronage. Chronism. You need to know somebody as a youth to be able to get something. You need to be able to ride on the back of somebody to be able to get something that is supposed to be legitimate for all of us. We have become so soon more tribalistic. We are intolerant of each other's religion. We continue to divide ourselves and teach our children how to hate each other, like I said earlier. Abuse power. We continue to abuse each other. You have an election calendar. The time has come for election. You are smart. You have the majority. Your tribe is bigger. So you want to go around it. And then the majority will support us because democracy is about majority. Until we all begin to respect the views of minority in our various constituencies, in our various homes, in our parliaments, it will continue to elude that. Let me just say, I was surprised about the report, and I'm happy that in his response he will respond to this. ECOWAS did something excellent at the beginning of this year. I expected to see it as part of the results so that we tell the world Africa is not all lost. Because what West Africa did with respect to Gambia, if they hadn't done it, it would have been part of this resource. Lastly, Mr. Speaker and Mr. President, let me say the guns that are entering Africa. If the European Union, I'm happy a rep is here, and the world wants to stop the guns from entering Africa, they'll be able to identify the guns from the rebels and be able to punish the perpetrators. We beg them, they must stop the guns from entering our continent. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And now I give the floor to Honorable Mrs. Bangirana Anifa of Uganda.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I wish to associate myself with most of the issues as have been raised by my fellow honorable colleagues. Mr. President and honorable colleagues, from the presentation and from the contributions, it's not disputable that peace and security is on top of the African agenda. At the same time, in my opinion, it's not in dispute that Africa is at war with itself. When you look at all the conflicts on the African continent, you will see brothers and sisters are fighting each other. Mr. President, my concern is now on, I've been thinking hard. Africa, one voice. Is this just a slogan? Are we just saying one Africa, one voice? Do we mean what we are saying? When you see all these conflicts, you'll find that they are all associated, they have commonalities, and the root cause, most of it, is political instability. And when you look at the political conflicts, especially on the Horn of Africa, you will see that the largest crisis of humanitarian crisis since 1945, according to UN humanitarian chief, is a cause of political instability. There is no doubt poverty and migration and displacement of our people is a big challenge on the African continent. And I would have seen and appreciated that the PSC should have looked so much into this area and report to us, because these are also one areas of insecurity on our continent. The current famine on the African continent, Uganda inclusive, 7.1 million people in Africa are severely food insecure. 4.9 million people are in urgent food, Uganda inclusive.
Merci, notre collègue.
Thank you very much, colleague. I now give the floor to Honorable Monji Rabawi from Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. As for the issue of peace and security, we know that in countries such as Libya, Somalia, South Sudan, and the Sahel and Mali, there are all kinds of challenges. And the commonality is that they suffer from poverty and ignorance. We should also take into account the fact that there's a lack of democracy. We don't respect independence and liberties. The governments are not respected. And there is not only a political dimension, but also a need to change the foundations of our societies. We should also take into account socio-economic challenges. These must be gradually resolved. We must also take into account the issue of religion. We need to have peaceful coexistence between religions. There should be no interreligious strife. This is how peace and security issues will be addressed. And we should avoid wars everywhere in the world and continue to strive to achieve our common objectives and not wage wars of all kinds. We know that peace and security is something that we very much attach to in Tunisia. We have to act all together in order to spare no effort on a national, international level. Thank you.
Ghana.
Mr. President, I want to start by saying that who funds the guns? We are saying that we should take the guns by 2020. Who funds it? Who produces the locally manufactured guns? It is not in only Europe and America that the guns come from. They come from our homes as well. We realize that in Egypt and Tunisia, the youth did not use guns. They used strength. If we don't empower our youth, if we don't give them jobs to do, we can take away their guns, but we can't take away their strength. We should give them food to eat and security. Politicians are here. When we buy lands, we give our boys guns to protect our lands. When we buy cattle, we give them guns to protect the cattle. After they've protected the cattle, what do they do with the guns? So if we are talking here as individuals and as politicians, we are behind, most of us are behind all these things. And we should remember that we have the disabled, we have the weak women and children. If we want Africa to work again, it can work again, but it should start from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Patricia Umu Danke from Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to highlight certain things relating to wars and conflicts. In Africa, especially Sierra Leone, we have witnessed 11 years of war in our country, and we are not ready to repeat that experience ever again. And all the women of my country are the ones that stood before the guns and say, no more, you can kill all of us, but this war is going to end. So I want to commend those countries that are still sustaining peace in their countries. And for the countries that are in war now, we want to encourage the PSC to do more to resolve the conflicts in those countries. Just recently in my country, we are talking, the opposition is even talking about war again. And this is where I have a question for the ambassador. My question is, what is the PSC doing when there are early signs of possible conflict and war in countries? What is the PSC doing? Let them put representatives in every country to avert, to avoid all these unnecessary wars in this continent. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Louis Kasingo from Namibia.
Thank you for the floor, Honorable President. Peace and security cannot be achieved if we don't implement the policy of inclusiveness. economically, socially, as well as politically within our different countries. Religious tolerance, as it was already stated, smooth transitional of power and democracy. I would also like to challenge our AU to come up with the policy of narrowing the gap between the rich and the poor. We can preach democracy, but people don't eat democracy. I'm coming from the country where there is a gap. Where is the gap between the rich and the poor? But our current president have come up with a policy called Harambe. Is it Swahili? Yes. Yes. And among others, we are trying to narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. For example, you have one country, but different society in that country. So, in parallel to condemning those people who are exploiting our mineral resources, we must also ask ourselves, what are we doing to ensure that Africa is peaceful? Honorable President, the smooth transition of power is also goes hand in gloves of previous president, sitting together with the current president. In my country, Namibia, the current president has come up with a presidential council where there is a
Honorable member, and now I want to give the floor to Honorable Mahadranu from Mauritius.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a very complex task, indeed, to analyze the peace and security situation in Africa. Reasons for conflicts and violence ranges from unemployment to corruption, inequality, bad governance, and this provides a very fertile ground for violence to grow. We all know Africa is a young continent with a median age of just 20 years old. Youth is exuberant. This could be an important economic boost to the region, or it can just be an increase the risk of instability and violence. The fire is there. It's up to us to use it to cook our food or to burn our houses. We should provide our youth with education, employment, and political voice. We should not forget that our continent is the next promised land for business. Then why are we not all growing as we deserve to? We need to be able to secure our resources, allowing our countries to prosper. Fair trade and fair distribution of national wealth are essential. We know that empty stomach feeds anger and desperation of the individual. On the other hand, a healthy person contributes to the economy. Our effort for peace and security goes hand in hand with the well-being of our nation and the population. And this should be one of our priorities. Who know better to know the value of peace than the war refugee that flees his home in search of safety, their lives swept away for some idealist agenda without consideration of human life. They dream to go home, they dream to build up Africa again. I dream of a united Africa where we all can discuss our issues and value our differences. A united Africa is not a utopia. This assembly represents that very dream, but we have a long way to go.
Thank you very much, and now I want to give the floor to Honorable Marie-Claire Jeanne Monti from Mauritius. She's not in the chamber. You have the floor, Madam.
Honorable President, I have listened with keen interest to what my colleagues have said before me. Let me just say at this stage that Africa is something that is very special. That is the warmth of the Africans' hearts. The warmth of our hearts and the movement of a women, political will. These are things that will help us. These are our assets that will help us to get Africa back on her feet, to enable the African continent to stand up again, to say no to war, If women decide to stand up and unite, that is possible because women are the symbol of peace and harmony. So women of Africa, let us stand up together. Thank you.
Floor to Honorable Asane Maru Di Kubu from Niger.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. Most of my concerns have already been taken by my colleagues. But in the presentation of the ambassador, he did not really refer to the organization of the G5 Sahel countries who have come together to combat terrorism in the Sahel. In fact, the case of Boko Haram was mentioned, but he did not talk about the consequences that the countries suffer from due to Boko Haram. The issue of refugees and the refugee camps in Niger are really hotbeds of epidemics and many other challenges. Also, there's a progressive return of some combatants who have laid down their arms to come back and to live in peace in their countries. This was mentioned by the ambassador. However, he did not talk about the support from development partners that should be forthcoming to assist the countries who are victims of Boko Haram. Thank you very much, dear colleague. I have now completed the list of 39 speakers. Now there's another list that was transmitted, and you can still send in your names if you want. I give the floor to Honorable Sylvestre from Cameroon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. I'm taking the floor following that of my colleague Bandam to provide some objective information, less passionate by the situation of the English speakers in my country. As you know, Mr. President, Cameroon consists of an English-speaking part that represents 20%, and the French-speaking part represents 80% of the country. And recently, the English speakers have raised concerns about the use of the English language on an equal footing as that of the French language, in particular in ministries and schools, the use of the common law in courts, the integration within universities and schools of the English system, as well as decentralization. All these issues have been discussed following the instructions given by the President of the Republic, and measures have been taken to take up the concerns raised by our brothers and sisters. And subsequent to that, a commission chaired by the former English-speaking Prime Minister Peter Mafani was set up to promote bilingualism and multiculturalism in our country. The issue of the status that my colleague raised is that of his political party, and not the issue of all English speakers. Thank you very much, dear colleague. I give the floor to Honorable Abdulaziz Abdullahi from Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. And I will start with a question because maybe my time will run. Excellency Ambassador, you have stated in the report that Somalia has taken a significant step of political progress. And now that the new Somali government has come up with a plan of eliminating terrorism within 2 years, you have also mentioned it in the report that there is an arms embargo on Somalia. The question is, how do the Somali government will implement its plans of carrying out these military operations against terrorism while our forces doesn't have the required equipment to fight against terrorism? That's my question. Mr. President, all these terrorism activities stated in this report are about projects by outsiders. These are foreigners together with the local agents that are driving these activities. And the number one reason being to paralyze the unity of this continent and also not to allow Africa to integrate. The number two reason is there is a financial benefit for both these agencies, local agencies and the outsiders. Mr. President, we will never defeat Al-Shabaab in Somalia as long as you are deploying forces from outside countries. It's only Somali forces that can eliminate and fight against terrorism in Somalia. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Honorable Betty Adiafi from Nigeria.
Mr. President, I want to say that a major recommendation of the PSC on this report is that member states of the AU should sign, ratify, and domesticate all existing AU normative instruments. Mr. President, these AU instruments encompasses most of the issues affecting African democracy, which most members have raised today. I will now ask the PSC to please give a timeline, let's say 2018, to make all member states of the AU to ratify all AU instruments. Maybe that will improve our democracy. And then the PSC in its 680th meeting was briefed by the Multinational Joint Task Force on its operations on Boko Haram. And it's surprising that your report has no mention of Nigeria, and somebody else has talked about Cameroon. You didn't mention Cameroon. These are the two countries that Boko Haram has been terrorizing. Then I'd like to also add that PSC should, in future, include a report on how to mop up arms. A lot of people have talked about the issues of arms. We need to have a plan on how to mop up arms in Africa. We believe that will help if Africa really wants to silence guns in the year 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Jean-Patrice French from Mauritius.
Thank you, Mr. President. So before I say a few words on the Western Sahara conflict, let me express my satisfaction that Morocco has resumed its rightful place within the family of the African Union after a voluntary absence of more than 30 years. Mr. President, the only way our continent can demonstrate a unity of purpose is for it to be united. And therefore, the readmission of Morocco, without any condition whatsoever, is a step in the right direction, which we of course welcome. Mr. President, it is hoped that with the unanimous resolution passed by the UN Security Council a few days ago, we shall soon acclaim a peaceful solution to the Western Sahara issue, which has caused, as we all know, and innumerable sufferings to the people of that region and prevented an entire population from enjoying their rights to a state and to peace. Mr. President, the Pan-African Parliament should do everything it can to encourage both Morocco and the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic to resolve their long-standing differences peacefully along the terms laid down by the United Nations as supported by the African Union. Before I end, I would like to wish good luck to all our honorable brothers and sisters and to the people of the Sahara Republic at large as the negotiation process in order to reach a long overdue solution to the Western Sahara conflict is on its way. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Honorable Said Ibrahim from Western Sahara.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. في البداية أضم صوتي إلى
Thank you, Honourable President. At the outset, I would like to add my voice to that of all my colleagues who spoke before me to thank the Ambassador for this brilliant report presented. I would also like to stress that the Pan-African Parliament should truly be aware of all the reports and all the details concerning the resolutions and the work of the Peace and Security Council in order to have updated information with all the necessary details so that we can know exactly what are the activities conducted by the Peace and Security Council on the African continent. Your Excellency, the Ambassador mentioned the Committee of Heads of State looking at the issue of Western Sahara, and we would like to know what is the status. The PSC said that there are urgent measures necessary to open an office of the African Union in this region, and now that Morocco has returned to the African Union in the Laayoune region, it's necessary to set up such a office of the African Union, not only to work on a political level, but also in the area of human rights and legitimacy of the occupied territories in Western Sahara. Likewise, Mr. President, let me mention that Morocco did not attend the previous meeting, although it was already a member of the African Union. The Republic of Western Sahara attended, but Morocco did not. And this shows that there is not really goodwill on the side of Morocco to abide by the resolutions and the recommendations of the African Union. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Honourable President. We should all, as members of the Pan-African Parliament, show our deepest attachment to promote and strengthen unity on our continent in respect for international legality and international law. Our African continent, through all its instances and organizations, and the African Union, of which the Pan-African Parliament is one of the main organs, recognize and commend the just causes that should be defended under the auspice of international law and legality. The first issue is we should all unite to fight against terrorism, which remains our common enemy, and this represents a destructive scourge, and we must combat it, whatever its nature, its position, or its ideology. We should all denounce it and condemn it, because terrorism is the cause of all destabilization and insecurity in a country, a region, or the planet. Algeria has fought hard to gain peace, stability, and security. The case of Western Sahara. The position of Algeria on this is very clear. Algeria has never been a party to this conflict that exists between a people fighting for its independence and the Kingdom of Morocco. The position of Algeria is for the implementation of the United Nations resolution that we should recall, organization of a referendum on self-determination. Let the people of Western Sahara decide of its own fate. If the majority of the people want their independence, so be it. If the majority of the people of Western Sahara want to return to the Kingdom of Morocco, then so be it. But we should expedite this resolution process. Thank you very much, Honourable. I now give the floor to Honourable Jeannette Kabila from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you, dear colleague. Honourable President, thank you for giving me the floor. We believe and reaffirm that a dialogue is the best way to ensure a lasting peace to all conflicts, armed or unarmed conflicts. In my country, the Democratic Republic, has a great experience in this regard. We are thankful for the efforts made by the African Union in order to contribute to peace and stability in my country, the DRC. Through the facilitation of the African Union, the DRC reached an agreement following the 18 October and 21 December 2016 dialogues. Today we have a government of national unity headed up by a prime minister from the opposition. And to form a government, Mr. President, it took us 1 month, so you can understand how complex the politics are in our country. The task of this government is to lead towards peaceful, credible, and transparent elections. And this is what the Congolese in 2006 and 2011 already wanted. Today, the Election Commission, the CENI, in charge of organizing elections, already registered 23 million out of the 45 million voters. We talk about a country of 86 million people and more than 600 political parties. Honorable President, terrorism is gaining ground on our continent. But what are the root causes of terrorism? Who are the perpetrators and who finance terrorism? Thank you very much, dear colleague. I now give the floor to Honorable Telekan Tesama from Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank the Ambassador for the deliberation of very brief information to this House. As it has been said, the causes of peace and security are many. In this regard, a lot has been said: lack of dialogue, lack of inclusiveness, unfair distribution of resource, and power-sharing problems in Africa. For this, I would like to join my colleagues in saying African Peace and Security Council should be able to develop its capacity to undertake early warning system, and the cause of these problems must be considered by the Council, taking measures, and also in undertaking the dialogue and discussions in different countries of the continent. So instead of talking, the PAP should also take special priority for bringing the issue on board in this House. So I think it's better to send fact-finding missions to these countries and reaching the people what the cause and the problems there. So that in doing that, in bringing the issue on board for different bodies.
Thank you very much. And now, yes. Les techniciens sont où?
Where are the technicians?
Votre problème technique, c'est quoi?
What's your technical problem, actually? Can you just move?
The telephone ringing. Mais changez un peu de place, voir si ça va marcher.
Can you just try another mic? If the technicians are not in, where are they?
Il y a un téléphone qui sonne.
There's a telephone ringing, either in the booth or in the chamber.
Honorable.
Honorable, please. There's a phone ringing somewhere, maybe in the booths. Honorable Buninga from Burundi, the floor is yours. Is it okay now? I thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have two concerns to raise relating to the report presented to us. While in October 2016 in Egypt, the report of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union referred to the situation in Burundi, this report, today's report, has omitted to make reference to the progress made in Burundi. My concerns, therefore, are as follows. What does the Peace and Security Council says about the economic sanctions of the European Union that are imposed on our people and not the political officials as stated by the authors? This situation does not leave aside the situation, a very precarious human rights situation. Secondly, what does the Peace and Security Council say about the refugees that are in Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, and DRC, and other African countries, and even Europe? These refugees who would wish to go back home, wish to have the situation, the state of play in this respect. Thank you, and I'll give the floor to Honorable Nyera Rugundo from Rwanda. I thank you, Mr. President. I think all has been said, but let me just flag prevention. I'd like to ask whether the African Union has enough means, strategies, and a conviction to address prevention. Because for me, a conflict cannot be resolved in one day. It is a long-term or medium-term project. Therefore, I'd like to know whether they do have the means or they're convinced that it is possible to prevent conflicts. Thank you. Honorable Sinia Ahmed Na from Western Sahara, you have the floor. I thank you, Mr. President. I thank the ambassador for the report submitted to us. I would like to... Microphone.
Vous avez laissé un micro ouvert là derrière, là où...
There's a mic switched on. Once again, thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank the ambassador for the report. I said that we've heard from the presenter classifying the Western Saharan situation or case as a decolonization case, which means that there is an occupier actually on our territories and there is colonization issue here. So what are we going to do to decolonize our territories? Is there any possibility to do so? Is there any possibility to decolonize our territory? We have been struggling for 15 years now, and we've counted on the African Union to continue the pressure, because the colonizer only knows the pressure, even military pressure, economic and political pressure. This is what we are expecting from you as Africans, you, the people of the African continent that freed our continent with your struggles. The issue is in your hands now. What are we going to do? Are we going to take arms once again? Are we going to fight once again to decolonize our territories and to suffer more than we've been suffering? Or is there any other way to do things? This is what we are putting in your hands, to exert political pressure, pressure from the parliament, pressure from the civil society, pressure, economic pressure, and also the condemnation and even severing the relations with Morocco so that Morocco abides by the international legality and the resolutions of the UN Security Council and the African Union resolutions, because Morocco is a colonizer Thank you very much, dear colleague. I now give the floor to Honorable Mohammed Hassan from Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the issue of Sudan, the first sentence reads, the situation relating to national dialogue, cessation of hostilities in Darfur, and the two areas of Blue Nile and Southern Kordofan remain unresolved to date. This sentence is incorrect, inaccurate regarding the first part of the national dialogue. Because, Mr. President, the national dialogue is an initiative of President Bashir. He called for this national dialogue in January 2014. An invitation was extended to all political parties and armed movements. Most of them, they welcomed the idea and they joined this national dialogue, which started in 2015, October 2015. Two armed movements were very reluctant and another political party to join this national dialogue. This is why President Bashir asked President Thabo Mbeki and President Abu Bakr Abdel Salam, who are leading the African Union High Implementation Panel on Sudan and South Sudan, to bring those armed movements on board. And this is why President Mbeki tabled the agreement named Roadmap Agreement on table in March 2016. The government at that time signed the agreement, and the rebels, they refused to sign. After a regional and international pressure, they signed the agreement in August 2016. And the agreement, the essence of the agreement was bringing them on board and reaching also a solution in Southern Kordofan and Darfur as well. The government started the national dialogue in October 2016, and it is concluded in October. And this national dialogue was welcomed by the African Union and the United Nations. I think what is meant here is the inclusion and bringing on board of those armed movements to the national dialogue, not the national dialogue itself.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. I now give the floor to Honorable Memedi Sidibé from Mali. I thank you, Mr. President. I do have three questions. The first one is whether there is a cooperation mechanism between the UN Security Council and the AU Peace and Security Council. The second question, the UN interventions within the Peace and Security Council are costly and very little efficient in Central Africa, in Mali, and other countries. So, isn't there any African mechanism that would create cooperation between the UN and Africa and make sure that the African problems are really effectively addressed through such a mechanism? The other question is, or the third question is about the solidarity and the African political will. There are 5 great countries, South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Algeria, Angola, etc., that, in my opinion, if they have any political will, political African will, they can constitute really a pole to defend Africa anywhere and at any time. They do have a proven experience. Some other countries have proven experience in this respect, such as Chad. I would add that this African will has been shown by through ECOMOG, the then ECOMOG, when the Nigerian president addressed the situation. And today there is indeed stability and peace in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Therefore, the African willingness should be shown and should be supported and backed. Honorable El-Said Ali Ahmed from Egypt, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.